All right. Okay, there we go. It should be recording. Hi, everyone. Welcome again to our January Lunch and Learn. We're here today with Vanessa, and Vanessa really holds a special place in our hearts at Engineers of Tomorrow, and I'll let her get into that. She's done some really awesome things that I know she's going to share with all of us today. And for us, we're here to amplify some really great stories about engineering. That's really kind of at the heart of what we're trying to do, tell better stories about engineering and empower all of you to do the same. So we're really excited to hear Vanessa's story and learn some more. So Vanessa, I will let you introduce it from there.
Thank you so much, Becky. I really appreciate that. Yes, there will be some teasers as to why EoT is so special in my heart. But so just to start off, hi, my name is Vanessa. My pronouns are she, hers. And I am a born and bred Torontonian who does still currently live in Toronto after I've graduated university. I am really passionate about a lot of stuff, and this presentation is going to kind of walk through as Becky mentioned, my kind of engineering story, how I ended up in the field, as well as go through some of my career path and the story of EngiQueers, which is kind of my claim to fame in the diversity in STEM world. And I'm going to leave you guys with something special, which is my values and the things that I hold most closely to my heart, and some cheesy words of wisdom as well. So to kind of kick off my timeline at a high level, I, as mentioned, a born and bred Torontonian, went to high school in Leaside, which was a kind of more wealthy upper class neighborhood. However, I lived in the apartment above the Domino's Pizza, so had a bit of a difference between my peers and I, but nonetheless, I had loads of privilege in gaining access to incredible facilities and the network of people that I was around. And this led me to going into McMaster University for a dual degree in engineering and management, which I started in 2012 and finished in 2018. And these days I work at Spin Master, which is a global children's entertainment and toy company that was actually founded here in Canada by a few folks from Western University. And if you've never heard of Spin Master, we're the brand behind Paw Patrol, Hatchimals. We've made acquisitions such as Etch-a-Sketch, or most recently Rubik's Cube, which is really exciting. So we kind of dabble in a bunch of different fields in the toy and kids entertainment world. I'm excited to share a little bit about my experience there today. So some really cool experiences I had while I was at Mac included an exchange to Grenoble, France, where I actually studied and worked at the Grenoble Institute of Technology. And this was an exchange program that had existed for about a decade between McMaster and INP. And it was a remarkable experience. My direct office room had engineers and researchers from Brazil, China, France, and myself from Canada. So it was a truly very global experience, and I really got to practice my French a lot more and learn. I wasn't that great at it, but I did improve. I also had an experience out in Vancouver, British Columbia for a different 8-month period where I was working for the Pepsi beverages plant. So I'd previously worked for Pepsi Foods Canada at their Quaker plant in Peterborough, and had requested kind of a transfer out west to really explore Vancouver. France made me fall in love with mountains, and it really inspired me to kind of try out that side of Canada. And it was a really phenomenal kind of personal growth experience where I was overcoming some mental health challenges and really focusing on bettering myself through exercise and healthy living. And it was another phenomenal experience. And then during my undergrad, as a queer woman of color myself, I've been always very passionate about LGBTQ inclusion. And as a first year, I found very few resources for me within the engineering space, or things that were more geographically accessible to me on campus relative to where the McMaster student-wide things were happening for for queer students. And I had started the McMaster EngiQueers, which was a club that I'll be talking about, but it actually grew to a national not-for-profit organization a few years later. So I'm really excited to walk through that story of how that happened. But from really where it all began in the good old days is just like anybody else. I was a kid who was excited to explore and try different things, and always was quite the little energetic little bug. But I also faced some unique challenges as well. In this bottom right corner are my grandparents, Paul and Bertha Nelanagam. And in Sri Lanka, there was a civil war for a really long time that, while my family had already moved to Canada, they had taken it upon themselves to create an orphanage in Sri Lanka. So they moved back for a little while. And while they were there, due to some of the situations that were happening in Sri Lanka and my grandpa's position as sort of a political figure in the area, he became aware of some really horrific atrocities that were happening, and he spoke out about them. And unfortunately, this resulted in the Sri Lankan government putting him in prison for 122 days. And they kept telling him that if you just basically lie and say that these things didn't happen, like, we'll let you out. But he really stood his ground and stayed for what was right. So Amnesty International got involved and ended up helping him get out. And he toured the world for a little bit, telling his story of what had transpired there and advocating for human rights. So this really instilled an obligation to society in our entire family. My mom was a social worker for 30 years. She just very recently retired, and she always instilled in us a passion to volunteer and to give back and to help others, have an easier time in life than we did in our journeys. And I was also having some unique challenges with the male fatherly figures in my life. My biological father, Larry, in this photo, he was a wonderful man, but unfortunately he had bipolar disorder and some addiction issues that led him to really be a different person for the vast majority of my life. And I experienced a lot of challenges with related to domestic violence and his eventual homelessness, and a lot of really challenging things to go through at such a young age. And unfortunately, his presence was replaced in my life with a stepfather who unfortunately abused me, and I later ended up in court against. So it was some trying times as a child. But as I mentioned, I did still have that kind of zest for life and energy as a kid anyways. And with my sister and my mom, who were the constants in my life, they were always such strong role models for me, and really showing that women can do anything and have no limits to them and no boundaries if to dedicate themselves to what they want to. And my sister, for instance, these days, she's just 7 years older than me. She's actually now the C-suite of on her organization, and so we have a lot of really dedicated career women in our lives. And as mentioned, being in Leaside, I was thankful enough to meet people's parents or people who were already in engineering, and they kind of just walked me through like what my skills were and how they thought it was a good fit for me. And they knew that I had sort of a complicated background, so I was actually fortunate enough to have the VP of Bombardier Aerospace's maintenance engineering department edit my resume for me as I applied to an internship, because he knew some of the challenges that I had, and he really wanted to make sure that I was getting seen for the accomplishments I had. So that sort of kicked off my co-op journey once I had entered engineering. And I started at Bombardier, was my very first internship. I was so grateful to have that networking opportunity with someone who had just been in the audience when I was a grade 8 valedictorian and who really stuck with me for many years on my journey. And in that time, I had fantastic mentorship opportunities with both their maintenance engineering department, where I actually worked, as well as their materials engineering department, where I got to see what it really means to be a failure analyst in the aerospace industry. And it, as mentioned with Grenoble, that's where I was doing research in fuel oxide cells. And it was, it's funny that it was all related to like sustainable energy, but I was working in like a 1 nanometer squared space for 4 months. So it was truly like the essence of materials engineering, of inspecting materials at the nano scale. And it was a really fantastic experience. And at Pepsi, this is where I really kind of was introduced to the manufacturing and Lean Six Sigma type side of the world. So as a materials engineer, you know, seeing both failure analysis and research in those first two co-ops, those are kind of really core pillars of materials kind of historically, whereas manufacturing is what a lot of materials engineers do end up going into, because the skill sets are very applicable to one another. And we do talk about mass manufacturing quite a bit, in materials. So I fell in love with fell in love with manufacturing. And somewhere along the lines, I also started working at Engineers of Tomorrow. So that is sort of what has always connected me with Becky and Erica, the founder. Is I had just seen Erica present at the Conference for Diversity in Engineering in Waterloo in 2014, 2015, that ballpark. And she was a materials engineer who cared about diversity and was like this consulting woman that I was like, wow, she's a badass. I definitely got to get to know her. And she offered me a position at EoT. So a fun fact is that I actually trained Becky once upon a millennial on the 101 of EIR and kind of the core fundamentals of what EoT was at the time. And she's now the CEO of the organization, which is great. And her and I got to spend a lot of time together, going to different conferences and working together on, you know, advocating for the nonprofit side of engineering, and just making sure that, you know, the engineers of tomorrow are equipped with the skills they need to know that regardless of their background or their education, there's kind of engineering's not as stereotypical as you think it is, and that there's a lot of really unique opportunities in it, as well as, you know, just making sure we were constantly advocating for diversity in the space, which is something I was quite passionate about with McMaster EngiQueers. So what really just started initially as a group for me trying personally to make social connections with other engineers that were queer as well, really blossomed into 3 core pillars over the 4 years that I was president of this organization. So it expanded into an education and advocacy space when, for example, in this bottom left corner here, fraternities on campus were like, hey, can you help to educate us on some LGBTQ issues and you know, language and words we should be saying, words we shouldn't be saying. How can we support our queer members? And that kind of presentation has grown and evolved over the years into a full systems of oppression training, that also an anti-oppression training, which talks about racism, classism, ableism. And these are conversations we've been having for like 8 years now. So obviously it's very topical in the news in this past year about things like Black Lives Matter. We were talking about that 8 years ago, and we were in front of engineering students being like, racism is a problem. And this was even kind of, you know, pre-Trump, pre-Brexit, pre all these things that where racism has kind of taken a bit more of a front seat again lately. So I remember the days when we used to kind of convince the audience, like, racism is still a problem. And people were like, no, it isn't. Like, it's fine. And I think that very few people in today's day and age would confidently say that racism is not a problem. So EQ always took this kind of intersectional approach of, yes, we were an LGBTQ organization, but like, I'm a queer woman of color. So, you know, it's not enough to just talk about queer issues or the fact I'm a woman or the fact I'm a person of color. You have to really talk about all these things in conjunction with one another. And that was really what we got to do externally. And then professional development. As engineers, we're in a profession, and it's so important for us to talk about the unique issues that queer folks or marginalized folks face in engineering. And that's where things like in this top left corner would happen, diversity in engineering night, we call it. So it was a panel of queer folks, Black folks, women who would come to tell us their varied experiences in engineering and give a lot of quality recommendations to the team. And I'm actually happy to announce that this little event that I worked as a collaboration with our Black Engineer Society, our Women in Engineering Society, and EngiQueers 5-6 years ago is now actually a conference that McMaster hosts between these 3 organizations collaborating. So we've really seen a lot of growth of this concept and really wanting to support. And we also, we kept the social connection going. We would have board game nights and drag show nights, and really making sure the community was staying engaged with one another. And we also had some fundraising and philanthropic efforts where we were kind of doing a bit of a PR social campaign where we would have very prominent figures in the community, such as our student presidents, our deans, our mascots. They would, pose in ways and with either the EQ logo or, two men hugging or in like a prom pose, that type of thing, where, we're just kind of articulating that from the top, we care about this, and this is an expectation that queer folks are welcome and supported within the community. And while we're at it, let's fundraise. So we used to raise money for Rainbow Railroad or Trans Lifelink, just really important LGBTQ charities that exist in the community. So somewhere along the lines with those education and advocacy trainings that I was giving, we started to get invited to more conferences that had different audience members. So it might have just started with McMaster, then eventually it was a couple schools in the area, then it was all schools in Ontario, then it was all schools in Canada. And as we were giving these content presentations about racism, classism, homophobia, people would be like, I'm sorry, what is this EngiQueers thing? How can I have one at my school? Like, we really need this. And that's where you fast forward a little bit and EngiQueers Canada came to be. So there was just such a need coast to coast for an organization like this at a school level to really have that community and have that that advocacy for our needs. And we're now a full-fledged not-for-profit organization. There's 32 schools in 9 provinces. So whether you're in PEI or you're in the prairies or you're in Victoria, BC, there's probably an EQ chapter for you to participate in. And we really manage this through a lot of national and provincial partnerships. So a lot of the places we were going to give conferences at, we would partner with the core organization to make sure that we were the group of choice to consistently be delivering this presentation, keeping it up to date, being a resource for these groups, and really helping to kind of work together to advocate for diversity in engineering in Canada. So some of the photos you're seeing here, this is out in British Columbia of the, I think it's 5 or so schools in BC that are marching in the Vancouver Pride Parade. And in the top left corner, you're seeing the Toronto Pride Parade, where we had 13 schools come out across Ontario to march in the Toronto Pride Parade. You can see there was probably about 200 people between all the schools marching in unison together to really make a statement of the inclusion that we expect and demand from our profession and from our community. And that Valentine's campaign that we ran fundraise for, I remember submitting a check for like $50 or $200 back in the day. We now raise thousands of dollars annually across the country as each group will run their own kind of event to raise money together. So I'm, of course, endlessly proud of EQ Canada, and they're on the third group of executives since I graduated, and it's been a true joy to watch how they've evolved and changed. And they're on platforms that I don't even understand anymore. So it really has grown and blossomed without us. So that's the happiest thing we could ask for. And now I'm at Spin Master. So this is as mentioned, it's a toy company, and it's about as crazy and cool as you can imagine, building toys for a living. Our culture is literally like if you took a bunch of children and put them in adults' bodies and were like, what would you want to do? Well, we'd want to have a really intense Halloween costume contest, please. We want karaoke competitions. We want scavenger hunts. There's a lot of these types of things that happen at Spin normally, but obviously we're in a Zoom world these days, so we do our best to take it virtually. But I'm so grateful that Spin has been very supportive of my diversity and STEM passions, and this was the Discovery Global Marathon that I participated in last year. And this year, it's actually my colleagues joined me. So our female director and VP, as well as 2 of my colleagues at the the professional level, the five of us are joined to do a discussion on women in engineering and what a workplace that is much more inclusive and more 50-50 can look like. And I was recently on a call with someone from the States who had seen the presentation last year, and she was talking about an environment she's in, which is like 99% male, and how these talks really help her have a community globally, even if she can't have a community directly in her plant. So that was really touching for me. But Spin Master is great. I mean, as a product development engineer, I do a little bit of a lot. So I'm kind of act as the midpoint between a lot of different teams to make sure that our products are ending up on the spec that we want them, that they're functional, performing well, meeting quality standards, manufacturability, all that good stuff, that they're costed appropriately, meeting our margins, that our vendors are reliable, these types of things, and that their schedule is on point. So making sure that it's trying to design the next big toy involves endless creativity, and trying to channel that creativity into meaningful milestones that will keep us on track to deliver to our customers on time. Spin Master has been a wonderful experience. I've been here almost 3 years now, and I've learned a lot. I got to also complete a management development program here, where I got to do some rotations in other departments in the operations team. So I'm very grateful for the time I've spent here. And as mentioned, I just want to leave you with my values. I did this wonderful leadership exercise where you write out your whole life story, and then you take away what are your core values. What are the things you hold most near and dear to you, and that really construct and make up who you are. And the 4 things for me are resilience and perseverance, truth and honesty, obligation to society, and community and collaboration. And I'm sure these things will be of no surprise to anyone who's just listened to my story, because you can see that these themes really have come up in different ways over and over again throughout my life, whether it was through the things I went through when I was very young, or through the creation of EQ, the work I do. All of these things tie very closely to each other. And even my colleagues at Spin will know that while, yes, we're a billion-dollar consumer packaged goods company, but I'm running the Sustainable Materials Committee, and I'm always talking about how we can make our toys more diverse or gender neutral or these types of things. So there's ways to kind of implement your values into everything you do, even if it might not be so explicitly obvious every time. And my cheesy takeaways are to never stop pushing through your barriers, to never underestimate your passions, and to never stop believing in yourself. Because if you really just know that you are the one who's going to keep driving yourself forward, you never know what you'll be able to accomplish. And an exciting thing that I've announced a couple times is that I have a YouTube channel now. So I have been very bored during COVID doing a fraction of what I normally do. So I've been kind of taking that energy online and making videos that range in a variety of topics. So I would really appreciate if you would go and subscribe and support the channel. It's growing slowly but surely, and I'm excited to take the perspective of a queer woman of color to a larger audience, and really help to be that representation that I wish I had seen more as I was growing up. So thank you so much, and if anyone has any questions or anything, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. It was just like such a wonderful trip down memory lane for me. Love hearing what you're up to. It's always good to check in with you. And I mean, the one thing that kind of kept coming up for me as you were talking was, I'm just so proud of you. You're just doing so amazing. Again, I would encourage everyone to, supporting Vanessa through just subscribing to a channel. It takes like 1 second to do, and it's such a powerful way to support someone else. And it really aligns well with our goals of sharing better stories. Vanessa's out there shouting them from the rooftops. So it's a great way to share those stories, make those connections, and continue to develop our own learnings, our own perspectives. So thank you so much for doing that, channeling your boredom, Vanessa. I haven't been quite so successful in doing that. I'm just bored.
I hear you. I go through days I'm either, sitting on the couch watching The Crown for way too many hours, or I'm making a puzzle while I'm water painting, while I have a Rubik's Cube going. Like it just, it's
Yeah.
one version of boredom or the other.
Yeah, at one end of the spectrum, eh?
Yeah.
Well, we do like to make these lunch and learns engaging, interactive. So encourage anyone if you have questions for Vanessa. We don't have an overwhelming number of people with us, so feel free. You can unmute yourself and chime in, or there is also a chat function that you could use. You can type your question in the chat. In the meantime, I have a couple questions that I'd love to get your perspective on, Vanessa, just to, kind of facilitate the conversation even more. So, again, just sort of through your lens, and through the work that we do a lot with Engineers of Tomorrow, we know that there's a perception that engineering, it's a cisgendered, it's white, heterosexual, male-dominated profession. Is that something you've seen? Do you believe that yourself? And how do you have you seen maybe any shifts happen with your experience?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say that firstly, definitely that's a stereotype, and unfortunately, it is mostly true. The stats out there are staggering across the country and across the province, and that's why we have Engineers Canada's 30 by 30 initiative and things like this. It's why these things exist so that we can try to improve the number of women in engineering. However, my fundamental criticism I've always had of the kind of engineering in diversity in engineering space in Canada is that it has been so cyclically focused on women for decades. And that was really, really important at the very, very beginning, several decades ago. But that conversation needs to progress and needs to expand because, yes, I'm a woman, but I'm not a woman full stop. I'm a queer woman of color. There's more parts to my identity. And if we're not progressing our communication, we're not going to see better results. So this is something that most people in the space have heard me complain about for years now. And I would say I've seen a dramatic shift in the conversation from, the pre-EQ days when I was, just going to these conferences to listen versus these days where either I'm speaking or participating, and there is way more acknowledgement of intersectionality. It's impossible to ignore racism in particular these days. You're simply just, your head's in the sand if you're trying to do that. So I definitely think that change is coming. I mean, we have a Black woman as the president of OSFI right now. We have, we're seeing progress in leadership. We're seeing change. There's Marisa Sterling's president, a PEO, female president PEO as well. So there's hope there, 100%. I think the biggest issue, I mean, there's so many issues. There's a lot of challenges with how the PNG is structured and how many women don't end up, getting their licensing. I know that some of the presidential candidates right now are working to address some of the issues that EITs are facing to stay engaged and stay involved. So I would say that it's unfortunately true, and progress is coming, but it's slower than we'd all like. But fingers crossed, a decade from now, it's a totally different environment.
I agree with you 100%. I think we don't talk enough about why. We just leap to gender parity and we don't talk
Yeah.
about why. And when you do start to talk about why, then you get into all the things that you just brought up. Do you mind talking a little bit about your own whys? Like why was it important to you to get your license, to become an engineer? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean it's a hot topic because so I still have an EIT right now because I've only been in the profession for like 3.5 years according to the definition. So I have to wait till July to apply for my PNG, which means that I don't have speaking rights or voting rights at the PEO, which is my regulatory body.
Oh, I lost your audio.
Which I find ridiculous because I pay fees to it. And I have gone to PEO AGMs with motions support. They've been putting a lot of burden on me as a volunteer or an individual to resolve the issue instead of the council figuring it out. Equally, I would have criticisms of OSCE as well with, you know, as the advocacy body and of the profession. I think that there's, they've done great work of being outspoken on the issues. However, I sometimes question if the resolution side and the working together side is where it needs to be. So I've had a pleasure participating in both councils, being members of chapters or on boards and advocacy groups, and I'm so grateful that I've gotten to see the inner workings of them. But I think it's so important for us to all stay vigilant with our profession and to make it better. So for me, getting the license, first and foremost, it gives me the title of engineer, which I've wanted since I was 18 years old. So that is a big part for me. But I think it really solidifies the obligation to the profession. That is, I think, fundamentally the spirit of it with the ethics and the law side. But I know that fundamentally, as a product development engineer, the day before I get my PhD to the day after I get my PhD, there's going to be no difference in my work. So there's some people who see no value in it, and that's where it gets really complicated, because like, what's actually changing? I'm still solving problems the day before, and I'll solve problems the day after. I think it's sort of archaic thinking of old school engineering, where sure, I can't stamp the bridge sign off before I have my PhD, or I can't be the one responsible for the electrical schematic until the day I have my PhD. But it's just not applicable to all industries, and I think that PEO is aware of this and they're working towards it, and I hope that, you know, OSFE is committed equally to helping them get there, and hopefully we'll see a lot more togetherness and collaboration to resolve some of these challenges.
We see a huge opportunity in the work that we're doing, and maybe you saw this too when you were with us with engineering outreach. Like, we're talking to kids, and there's a space there to talk about engineering as a regulated profession. What does that mean? And if we start talking to kids about it, it just normalizes it, and it helps, you know, take away some of those questions. And as you were talking there too, I was remembering that I think we might have been at a change lab, and you did a presentation with someone else who I can't remember at the time about our identities. And I remember, you know, that was really eye-opening for me, thinking about how does engineering play into my own identity, and what does that mean? And, you know, does getting the ability to stamp something, how does that factor in? So there's lots of different things at play there. I don't want to take up all the time. Does anyone else have any questions for Vanessa? I've got lots if no one else does.
I think I saw Deepika said something. Oh, she's so sweet. Hi, Deepika. Thanks for
Hi. Yeah, I was just it was so nice seeing the picture, because I don't think I've ever seen the picture of like EngiQueers just like that. And I'm like, I just thought about this, and now it's like this huge organization. And you know, you were saying how you don't even know what platforms they use anymore. So it's amazing that like you're like one thought just like created this big thing. And yeah, I work with Vanessa at SpinMaster, and she's 100% just like that at SpinMaster too.
You're so sweet. Thank you. Yeah, no, it's EQ. I try to stay connected, but equally, like, they needed to grow beyond me, because fundamentally they are like a university organization, and we toyed around for a long time of like, the profession needs this just as much as the university space needs this. Like, should we take like an EWB approach and have both student and professional chapters? I just, knowing the amount of work that the university side required, and the fact that now we're national, I was like, the amount of work it's going to require for us to build this on a national level of a profession side, I just wasn't ready to make that commitment. So it's always nice to see what the students are up to and how they're engaged. And I believe so strongly in student engagement and involvement. And what's fantastic is now that we have like partnerships with Engineers Canada. So this year was supposed to be the first year that EQ Canada was supposed to train the regulators nationally. So we've already been training Engineers Canada in the past, the staff at Engineers Canada, but we're now supposed to be training the the board, so that like the actual decision makers of engineering regulation across the country are turning to EQ for how do we stay relevant, how do we stay current, which is so great, and I'm so glad that they're doing that. And hopefully in a post-COVID world, we'll see these types of things.
I think that's so cool, Vanessa. I mean, you've got the chapters going at the university level, and it's so amazing. I mean, at one point you said back in 2018, I'm like, that's just 2 years ago. Like, it's not that long. It's really just incredible to see. And now you're sort of infiltrating, right? Like you're working kind of in this stealth mode of like going from the inside out at the professional level too. So it's really neat to see the way that that's developed. There was a comment from Don. Looks like he maybe had to hop off. And he just said, thank you very much, Vanessa. Great to hear about your passions and values, your life and your work. And he also graduated from LHS in 1968. I didn't know that.
No way! Oh my gosh!
You've got
For those
that
who
in
don't know,
common,
Don
Don.
Ball
There you
is
go.
like
So Don is one of our
most...
engineer in residence program volunteers, for those on the call that don't know Don.
Yeah, wow, that's wild. I'll have to send him a note. That's so funny.
Does anyone else have any other questions for Vanessa? While you're
I had a quick question.
Oh, go ahead.
Vanessa, you mentioned you did this one of like the leadership things where you just like wrote out like your whole story, which helped you write out your values. Mm-hmm. Was it something you just like found online, or like was it run by someone? I'm just like curious because I'm like, oh, like that's such an interesting exercise to do.
I was curious too.
So
what was that?
Like where
I'm actually surprised. Yeah. I'm surprised you think I've never told you the story. As part of the management development program, like the whole program is intended as like a leadership development program. So we had 3 different training weeks throughout the program where we were getting these intensive trainings, and some of it were on like hard skills, like project management skills or presentation skills, that type of stuff. But a lot of it was spending time with leadership at Spin Master. Unfortunately, a large cohort of that leadership no longer is at Spin Master. We had a lot of leadership changes, but Bill Hess was our former EVP and CIO, and so this is somebody who's been in industry for decades, and specifically not toy industry, but consumer packaged goods and the like. And so he actually shared his values with us first, as this sort of, so he, the way I just had them as a list of 5, picture each one being like a PowerPoint slide of kind of a summary of why that value is important, and articulated in a way of how he holds himself to that standard and how he holds others as like a leadership value. And so he was talking to us about how this was like a tool he uses with his team of kind of expectation setting on things that are critical and important. And he explained to us the exercise he went through in order to get there. And we were fortunate enough that he actually shared his life story with us in a group. And it was one of the most profound experiences I've ever had, having an older white man be so vulnerable in such a position of power. I've never experienced anything like that, and that it moved me to do it in my spare time. I talk about my life story and I reflect a lot about my journey in life. So over the span of about a year, I just, on a random Saturday would just sit there and write. And one day it was done, and I shared it with him while he was still at Spin, and he gave me some recommendations on how to get my values out of the story. And it was it was one of the most intense things I've ever done, because obviously everyone knows your own life story, but to articulate it and summarize it and highlight the most important events was amazing. And now I integrate it into my talks to add sort of a layer of vulnerability, but even just to help people really understand me. So I definitely recommend people to try to write out your life story. It's quite the experience.
Yeah, I like that. And there's a lot of time now, so I might try it out. Thank you for sharing.
Now you'll have to send it to Vanessa, and she can help you, right? Pay it forward.
100%.
Yeah, it's not easy to do. It really, really having that clarity and that self-awareness is very, very powerful. I see a few people have had to hop off. We are kind of coming up on if folks are joining us for lunch or whatever. There was a comment here from Matt Shepard. So Matt is our connection at the Faculty of Engineering at Queen's, who recently signed on with us as a sponsor. So I'm so glad he was able to join us today. And he was just talking about, or in his comment here, he made a little note about the EngiQueer chapters at Queen's, and they're such a great group. So nice. He appreciated getting that insight into the larger organization. So glad
great.
you were able to join us. Thanks, Matt. And maybe just to kind of wrap things up, Vanessa, can you maybe leave us with some ideas on how we can, being whoever we are at an organization or in our everyday lives or as engineers or people who maybe just know engineers, how we can promote that inclusion and that sense of community and engineering identity in our workplaces or in our environments.
Yeah, well, I mean, EngiQueers wasn't built in a day, right? I think that all it takes is consistent dedication to something that you're passionate about. So if you care about the issues that are going on in your workplace, it's speaking up in different opportunities in different ways. Like Spin Master, for example, we have something called Concept Jam, where anyone internally can pitch a toy idea. I took the opportunity to pitch a philosophy of responsible, sustainable toy development. So with diversity and inclusion in mind, and science, and so you can kind of get creative in how you're articulating, because I get the pressure of not wanting to be the person who's critical or the person who's presenting problems forward. Instead, try to be the person presenting solutions. And that's sort of how the journey of EQ happened, where I came forward with the idea of this club, and we slowly built the constitution, and it evolved and changed over time, and then it just snowballed. But EQ was really, when I think back to what EQ actually was, it was phone calls, it was emails, it was meetings, it was organizing behind the scenes, it was having conversations with important people to get their buy-off, and then keeping them accountable to being public about that support and buy-off. And really just relying on that collaboration and community to know that you're not alone in your thoughts. There's other people who want the same things as you do. And equally, that the people who are in the positions of power, they ultimately probably just want you to be happy. So they want a happy workforce, they want a happy school. So if there's energy behind ideas, they will have support for it. So definitely reach out and stay connected with communities that exist, and like that example of the woman I gave in America. If you don't have that community exactly where you are, lean on global communities to help support you and idea share on these things.
Beautiful. Thank you so much again, Vanessa. On that note of support too, I should say, we do have, at Engineers of Tomorrow's support, I mentioned Queen's Faculty of Engineering, but I do want to take a second and thank our other sponsors that help support the work that we do. So we have Smith & Anderson with us and Woodbridge Foam with us, as well as Linamar. So thank you so much to all of them for their support so that we can continue to tell these amazing stories like Vanessa's about engineering and amplify them. Well, thanks again, everyone, for giving up a bit of your lunch hour today. I don't think we have our guest speaker or our guest in place yet for February's session, so stay tuned for that. We've got some ideas, but we have to get a firm commitment back from our community members here. So stay tuned and keep your eyes open for that. And as I mentioned, we will share this replay with everyone, so you get a copy of that in case you want to share it with some of your friends. And be sure to check out Vanessa's social media and subscribe to her YouTube channel. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.